Etienne, Julia Somerville and Trevor MacDonald.
Gorbachev says communism is still the way forward. The plotters tried to break me, I said go to hell. Triumphant Yeltsin launches a crackdown on communism. The people attack the symbols of the past. And a coup leader kills himself, the others are arrested. Good evening. President Gorbachev showed himself to the world today and said he stands by the Communist Party that failed to support him during the coup. He told his first news conference back in Moscow that reactionary forces within the party would be forced out, but the party itself was essential to the process of reform. But the man who helped restore him to power, Mr. Boris Yeltsin, told a huge crowd of cheering supporters he wanted to crush the power of the Communist Party, especially in the armed forces. The crowds chanted, "Down with communism," and tonight demonstrators began attacking party buildings in Moscow.
Mr. Gorbachev described in some detail today what happened when the men from Moscow who asked him to resign arrived at his holiday villa in the Crimea. He paused several times during his press conference, struggling to control his emotion as he recalled the early shock of the coup. He said he discussed with his family what he should do. Then he told the men, "To hell with you." He wouldn't do any deals with them, he said, "otherwise I would have to commit suicide." 7 of the 8 coup leaders are under arrest tonight. The other, former Interior Minister Boris Pugo, killed himself. Tonight, demonstrators gathered outside KGB headquarters and pulled down the statue of the founder of the secret police.
There has never been a news conference like it. The president of the Soviet Union, greeted by applause, returned today to tell the world how men he trusted tried to remove him from power, to admit how he feared for his life and the lives of his family.
The situation was critical. Those people were really people of an adventuristic frame of mind, and they were risking a great deal. And when they began to understand that their adventure was over, they, I think, could have been ready to do anything. So I was ready, and so I consulted with my family. I think that I had to be very cautious, and I had to really keep my nerves in check.
For the Gorbachevs, the drama began when a group of officials arrived at their holiday home on Sunday evening.
I took a telephone, and I saw that the telephone was not functioning. Another one was not functioning. In-house telephone was not functioning either. So I saw that I was isolated, and I understood that that mission would not be for me the kind of mission that we normally see. So I went to call my family, my wife, my daughter, my son-in-law, and I said to them that something has happened. I understood what was happening. I saw that it was something very serious. I saw that it would be either an attempt at blackmail or an attempt to arrest me. Anything might happen. I understood that. I was fully isolated from the sea and from land. 32 of my personal security guard were with me until the very end, and they said that they will defend me until the very end. They divided the area into zones to defend my family and me, and they said that they will be with me until the end.
Mr. Gorbachev's response to the coup leaders was uncompromising. He refused to give in.
So 72 hours of total isolation, of confrontation. They tried psychologically to break me. It's difficult to be in that situation, of course. But that's how it continued. So I said to them, you and those who sent you are adventurers. You will ruin yourselves, but God damn you, that's up to you. If you want to ruin yourselves, but you will ruin the country and what we've begun. I said, well, you will have an emergency, but what happens next? What happens next, the next day? You should try to forecast what would happen. The next step and the next step. The country will not support you. You want to play on the difficulties that we are going through. You think that the country will support any dictator?
Mr. Gorbachev's wife Raisa and eldest granddaughter Oksana were with him when he arrived back in Moscow this morning. The whole family had been with him in the Crimea, including the youngest granddaughter Anastasia. Raisa Maximovna Gorbachev had clearly been through an ordeal.
Well, Anastasia, the granddaughter who did not understand anything, had the best time. She didn't understand anything. She wanted to bathe in the sea, to swim in the sea. But, of course, we made sure that nothing of the kind happened, because anything, was dangerous at that time. So we isolated ourselves totally. But for Raisa Maximovna and my daughter, that was a difficult time. Yesterday, Raisa Maximovna had a very bad spell. But it seems that that's just an episode.
Mikhail Gorbachev's learnt an important lesson about who his friends are. He was saved by an old enemy, Boris Yeltsin, and betrayed by some old friends.
People whom I, myself, promoted, whom I believed, whom I trusted, and they turned out to be not only participants in that plot, but organizers of that conspiracy against the president, against the constitutional structure, against perestroika, against democracy.
In an address to the nation on state television later, he admitted he'd made mistakes in choosing the country's leaders. It's been a difficult lesson, he said. And there were pictures of him meeting foreign diplomats. Before the coup, relations with the West were at an all-time high, and Mr. Gorbachev's clearly anxious to restore his standing. He will not lack for attention. Tonight he was once again winning the hearts and minds of the world's press, but he knows he still faces a more difficult audience at home. His main problem now may be his continued loyalty to an increasingly unpopular Communist Party. Mr. Gorbachev pledged tonight to purge it of reactionary forces, but made it clear he remains a committed party member. I still believe in the socialist way, he said. That won't help his standing with the public or his relations with Boris Yeltsin, who's ever more popular and ever more radical. Tim Hewitt, News at 10, Moscow.
Mr. Yeltsin told huge crowds outside his Russian parliament building, "The coup has been defeated, we have won. This must never happen again in our country." He said without the Russian people, the coup would have succeeded. He stood on the balcony of the building, smiling as they chanted his name.
Tonight, Moscow's skyline was ablaze with the sound and sights of celebration. Fireworks over the Kremlin to mark the people power that brought President Gorbachev home. The euphoria was evident from dawn this morning when the last tanks withdrew from the city's streets. But these were not hostile forces which had fought to depose the president, rather loyal Russian soldiers who'd stood to defend Boris Yeltsin and his pro-democratic supporters. Relief as the symbols of conflict were removed. Inside the Russian parliament this morning, they rose for the republic's national anthem. And Mr. Yeltsin was given a standing ovation by the MPs who joined him throughout the coup. The Russian leader paid tribute to the heroic Muscovites who for 3 days were on the barricades and who today turned their struggle into victory. Outside, the thousands were no less enthusiastic, roaring approval for every fresh announcement. Theirs was a new voice of confidence.
For the first time in Russian history, the Russian people have stood up straight and gone down to the streets and been willing to die for their political institutions. They've always been willing to die for their country. But this is something new, and I think it's very important.
Mr. Yeltsin, Russia's hero and figurehead, appeared on the balcony. The crowds vowed continuing support. His bodyguards held a bulletproof shield in front of him, proof of the tension that still exists even now. Armed guards were poised and alert, security men ready to protect the man who for 3 days has protected Russia. His supporters called for Boris Yeltsin to be made a hero of the Soviet Union. Amongst the crowd, Eduard Shevardnadze, the former foreign minister who for so long has warned of the forces now defeated. Amongst the crowd, a young tank commander who defected during the coup. Mr. Yeltsin was in extravagant mood. Russia, he said, has saved democracy, saved the Soviet Union, saved the world. We have won, he told the crowd, and this must never happen again. And in 2 immediate decrees, Mr. Yeltsin ordered the end of Communist Party cells in the armed forces and declared the old pre-revolutionary Russian flag would once again be flown by the Republic. And then silence, breathtaking stillness, as the crowd stood to remember and honor the victims of the coup. It was the only moment of reflection during a day of proud and peaceful attacks on the symbols of communist Russia. The new Republican flag was hung on the headquarters of the Central Communist Party headquarters, the crowd reveling in the party's humiliation. The flag was also hung on the KGB headquarters, the Lubyanka, and as the crowds moved in, painting accusing graffiti on the Soviet Union's most awesome instrument of power, hardliners like Viktor Alksnis voiced fears of a backlash.
I think a purge will now begin. Enemies of the people will be tracked down, and I fear we will fall into the mire of neo-Stalinism. Only now it will be under a different banner.
By this evening, the demonstrators outside the Lubyanka were preparing to tear down the statue of Felix Dzerzhinsky, Lenin's original police chief. Such is the confidence of the Yeltsin supporters that tonight they've dared to deface this KGB monument. Their faith in their own victory has now taken them out beyond just the Russian Parliament building. They're beginning to claim Moscow as their own. Claiming it back from the communists, whose credibility has been destroyed by Boris Yeltsin, whose power has been crushed by these demonstrators, and whose General Secretary, Mikhail Gorbachev, is tonight back in the Kremlin. Penny Marshall, News at 10, Moscow.
Only one of the 8 members of the State Emergency Committee, which was running the Soviet Union until yesterday, managed to escape. 6 are under arrest. The Vice President, Gennady Yanayev, who led the coup, the Defense Minister, Dmitry Yazov, Oleg Baklanov, Deputy Chairman of the Soviet Defense Council, the KGB Chief, Vladimir Khrushchev, Alexander Titsiakov, President of Soviet State Enterprises. The Soviet Prime Minister Vladimir Pavlov is under arrest in hospital. He's being treated for high blood pressure. Boris Pugo, the Interior Minister, shot himself as troops arrived to arrest him. Vasily Starodubtsev, head of the Farmers' Union, hasn't been found. The new temporary appointments are at the KGB, Leonid Shebasin, a long-serving KGB officer. At the Interior Ministry, Lieutenant General Vasily Trushin. The new Defense Minister is General Mikhail Mosaev.
On the line to Moscow a short time ago, I asked one of our correspondents, Robert Moore, whether it was felt that Mr. Gorbachev had made a better job this time of picking his team.
Well, I think these appointments were made in a hurry, Trevor, made by a man who needs to make an impact quickly on Moscow. The view, though, I think, is that these are likely to be transitional figures. In the medium term, there has to be a much more fundamental and radical restructuring and reshuffling of the Soviet hierarchy.
Robert, it's being suggested that Mr. Gorbachev's declared attachment today to the Communist Party is tantamount to political suicide. Any sense of that in Moscow tonight?
Yes, Trevor, there is a feeling that he's taken a grave political risk here tonight. He's backed a party that's performed pitifully over the last 4 days, has lost much of its reputation. But I think, like many risks that President Gorbachev takes, this has been a highly calculated one. He knows that in one sense he has nowhere else to go, because on the radical side they already have a very charismatic leader in the form of Boris Yeltsin. So I think tonight he remains in the same political position that he has been for the rest of his presidency, which is trying to link the centre ground of Soviet politics with both the hardliners and the radicals.
Robert, quickly, do you think he can manage to do that?
Well, I think it's going to be a supreme challenge, and I think that he's probably lost the initiative to Boris Yeltsin now. Much of the power has shifted away from the centre and to Republican leaders. So I think now he has the same problems, but not the same power.
Robert Moore, thank you.
Mr. Yeltsin's demands to disband communist cells in the armed forces and to set up a Russian Guard are another challenge to the power of the Soviet military machine. His decree against the armed forces and the party members who took part in the coup highlights the breakdown in the old-fashioned power bases in the Soviet Union, as our diplomatic correspondent Jeffrey Archer reports.
Edward Shevardnadze wants to strip the Kremlin wall of some of the remains of its communist heroes to make room for the 4 who died in the coup. It's a suggestion sacrilegious enough to shake Joseph Stalin in his grave. This week's coup has rocked what have been the very foundations of Soviet power since Stalin's time: the KGB, the military and the Communist Party, what the British Foreign Secretary dubbed the 3 ugly sisters. The central role of the Soviet Communist Party may at last be ending. For card-carrying members who've climbed the party hierarchy, the days of privileged living may be numbered. No more special restaurants or private clinics. In the Republic of Russia, communist cells in the factories are already banned, and today they were outlawed in the army as well. The coup organisers were all party leaders. As a result, their headquarters drew public abuse today. Yet, astonishingly, President Gorbachev is still giving the party his backing.
The Communist Party of the Soviet Union is thoroughly discredited. The fact that Mr. Gorbachev at his press conference this afternoon reaffirmed his commitment to the Communist Party, I think constituted a form of political suicide. It's not only the party that's discredited, he has now, I think, discredited himself.
I think that he should step down now or a little bit later when we will have new elections. And I think I don't think that people will believe that he can be a leader anymore for all of us. And it's a very strong feeling, especially in Russia.
Following the coup, the future of the Soviet military is clouded. The soldiers who refused to fire on the Russian people may have enhanced their reputation, but their top commanders face serious questions for taking orders from the coup leaders. The reaction from the Russian and Ukrainian republics is to demand that they have control of the Soviet army on their own territory.
Yeltsin has declared himself in charge of all Soviet troops on Russian soil. If that happens in the other republics as well, then the whole organization and nature of the Red Army is going to change. In other words, it will be national formations, and it will probably be national formations under the Republican leaders, and those Republican leaders will have to give permission for the central government to use those troops.
After its crucial role in the coup, the KGB faces intense criticism. The organisation responsible for state security both inside the Soviet Union and abroad has recently acknowledged glasnost by allowing a glimpse of its operations. But the door to its secrets has only been partially opened. Demands for greater public accountability are bound to grow.
Soviet society will still need some form of state security, and there have been elements evidently within the KGB who remain